Ancient Greece gave the world philosophy, democracy, and architecture. But buried underneath all of that are inventions so advanced, so ahead of their time that modern engineers still study them today. The minds behind these creations were operating at a level that the rest of the world took centuries to catch up with. 1. The world's first computer. In 1901, a group of sponge divers pulled something strange out of the ocean near a Greek island called Antikythera. It was a lump of corroded bronze sitting on the seafloor for over 2,000 years. Nobody knew what it was at first. Scientists looked at it, turned it over, argued about it for decades. Then, in the 1970s, researchers finally cracked it open using X-ray technology. And what they found inside completely changed how we think about ancient people. This device had more than 30 interlocking bronze gears, all fitted together with a precision that engineers today still find remarkable. You could turn a handle on the side and the mechanism would calculate the positions of the sun, the moon, and all 5 planets known to the ancient Greeks. It tracked lunar cycles. It predicted solar eclipses. It even had a dial showing the 4-year Olympic cycle so people could track when the games were coming up. The man behind the original design is believed to be connected to the school of the great thinker Archimedes, who lived around 287 to 212 BC. The device itself dates to roughly 100 BC, and it operated at a level of mechanical sophistication that Europe did not see again for another 1,400 years. The next time humanity built gears this precise and this complex was during the Renaissance period in the 14th century. That gap alone tells you everything about how advanced this thing really was. Today, the original sits in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and researchers are still discovering new details about how it functioned. 2. Fire that burns. Underwater. Most people think of fire as something water puts out. The Byzantines, who inherited much of ancient Greek knowledge, engineered a fire that water made worse. Greek fire was a liquid incendiary weapon that burned on the surface of the sea, clung to wood and skin, and kept burning even when sailors tried to douse it. Enemy fleets that came close to Byzantine ships would find themselves engulfed in flames they could not extinguish with anything available to them. The weapon traces its roots directly to Greek chemistry and engineering. A chemist named Callinicos of Heliopolis, living around 672 AD, is credited with bringing this formula to Constantinople. But the raw chemical knowledge behind it, the understanding of petroleum distillates, quicklime, and combustible compounds, came directly from centuries of Greek scientific tradition. Byzantine warships used bronze tubes mounted on their bows to project streams of this burning liquid at enemy vessels. The psychological effect alone was devastating. Arab fleets attacking Constantinople in 674 AD and again in 717 AD were both repelled largely because of this weapon. Soldiers who had never seen anything burn on water simply broke and fled. The exact formula for Greek fire is one of history's most closely guarded secrets. The Byzantine Empire protected the recipe so carefully that even internal government records never fully described it. Modern chemists have made educated guesses, a mixture of crude oil, pine resin, calcium phosphide, and possibly quicklime. But nobody has ever fully replicated it. 3. The first distance measurer. Before GPS, before maps with scale bars, before any modern distance measuring tool, the Greeks built a device that could count exactly how far a wheeled vehicle had traveled. They called the concept a hodometer, and it worked through a beautifully simple mechanical chain reaction. A wheel of known circumference, say 4 feet across, was attached to a system of gears. Every time that wheel completed a full rotation, one gear clicked forward by one tooth. After a set number of wheel rotations, a larger gear moved forward, and eventually a small stone dropped into a container. At the end of the trip, you counted the stones, and each stone represented a specific distance. The whole system was purely mechanical, required no power source, and worked reliably on any terrain. The Greek engineer Heron of Alexandria, who lived around 10 to 70 AD, documented this device in detail. Some historians also link the design to Archimedes, suggesting the concept goes back even further to around 250 BC. Roman engineers later adopted the same technology for military logistics, using it to measure roads and plan troop movements across thousands of miles of empire. The odometer only reappeared in a recognizable modern form in the 17th century, when European inventors began studying Old Greek and Roman texts. Benjamin Franklin even built his own version in the 1700s to measure mail routes. The original idea, though, came entirely from Greek minds more than 2,000 years earlier. 4. Greeks had steam power. First, most school textbooks credit James Watt with inventing the steam engine in the 1760s. That credit belongs to him for making it practical and industrial. But the actual principle of using steam to generate mechanical motion was demonstrated in Alexandria, Egypt, a city deeply embedded in Greek intellectual culture, around 60 AD by a man named Heron of Alexandria. Heron built a device called the Iolipoli. It consisted of a sealed metal sphere mounted on two hollow tubes that connected to a boiling water container below. As the water heated up, steam traveled through the tubes and into the sphere, then escaped from two small nozzles bent at opposite angles on the sides of the sphere. The escaping steam created thrust and the sphere spun. It was a real, functioning, rotational steam device, built almost 1,700 years before the Industrial Revolution. Heron understood the mechanics perfectly. He knew steam created pressure. That pressure could generate motion, and that angled nozzles would cause rotation. What he built was not a toy or an accident. It was a deliberate engineering demonstration. The tragedy is that nobody in that era connected this principle to large-scale practical use. Slave labor was abundant and cheap across the ancient Mediterranean world, so the economic pressure to automate physical work simply did not exist the way it did in 18th century Britain. Had someone taken Heron's Eolipoli seriously and scaled it up, the Industrial Revolution could have happened inside the Roman Empire. 5. The first heating system. People generally assume central heating is a modern luxury, something that came with industrialization and metal pipes and electric thermostats. The ancient Greeks were running a version of it inside their most important buildings around 350 BC, and they did it without electricity, without modern materials, and without any instruction manual from a previous civilization. The system worked by channeling hot air through spaces built underneath the floors and inside the walls of a structure. A furnace burned outside the building, and the heated air traveled through these hollow channels, warming the stone floors from below and radiating heat outward through the walls. Worshippers walking into a temple on a cold Greek morning would feel warmth rising through the floor beneath their feet. The Temple of Ephesus used an early version of this system. Greek engineers designed the channels and calculated airflow so the heat distributed evenly, rather than just collecting in one corner. The Romans later expanded this technology into their famous Hippocaust system, running it through bathhouses, villas, and public buildings across the entire empire. But the foundational engineering thinking came from Greek builders centuries before Rome made it famous. Modern radiant floor heating, the systems people install in luxury homes today where warm water runs through pipes under the flooring, operates on exactly the same principle the Greeks figured out more than 2,300 years ago. Every invention on this list rewrote what humans thought was possible. Hit that like button and keep watching. What comes next will genuinely shock you. 6. The Greek alarm clock. Plato, the philosopher who wrote about ideal governments and the nature of reality, also apparently had places to be in the morning. According to historical accounts from around 400 BC, Plato used a water-powered alarm device to wake his students up for early morning lectures. This makes him, among all his other achievements, one of the earliest recorded users of an alarm clock. The mechanism worked through a controlled water flow. Water dripped at a measured rate into a container. When the water level reached a certain height, it displaced air through a tube connected to a pipe organ-like reed instrument. The escaping air created a loud sound. Think of it as a very early, very wet version of an alarm buzzer. The timing was set by adjusting how much water you started with and how fast it dripped. A later and more refined version was built by Ctesibius of Alexandria, a Greek engineer who lived around 285 to 222 BC. Ctesibius was obsessed with water-powered machines. His alarm device used a float system that rose with the water level until it triggered a mechanism releasing a set of small pebbles onto a drum, creating a loud rattling sound. He also added a visual indicator, a small figure that rose with the water level and pointed to the current hour on a marked column. This is not a metaphor or a rough approximation of an alarm clock. This is an actual timed sound-producing device built specifically to wake people up at a predetermined hour. 7. The machine that built Greece. The Greek building crane does not get nearly enough credit for what it made possible. The Parthenon, the Temple of Zeus, the theater at Epidaurus. None of these structures could have been built at that scale without a mechanical lifting system capable of raising enormous stone blocks to significant heights with a relatively small workforce. Greek engineers developed the polyspaston, a compound pulley and crane system, around the 6th century BC. Archimedes later formalized the mathematics of the pulley system, famously saying that given a long enough lever and a place to stand, he could move the entire Earth. He was describing mechanical advantage, the principle that a small force applied over a longer distance can lift a much greater weight over a shorter distance. The Greek crane used multiple pulleys arranged in sequence so that the mechanical advantage multiplied with each additional pulley added to the system. A team of workers operating a tread wheel, a large wooden wheel they walked inside like a hamster wheel, could generate enough force to lift stone blocks weighing several tons. Archaeological evidence found at Greek construction sites, specifically the pattern of holes left in stone surfaces from lifting tongs, confirms these machines operated at an impressive scale. Roman construction engineers adopted Greek crane technology so thoroughly that the two traditions became almost inseparable. 8. The Greek crossbow. The crossbow has a long association in popular culture with medieval European warfare and Chinese military history. What most people do not know is that Greek engineers in Sicily developed a functional crossbow-type weapon, called the gastrophetes, around 400 BC, predating the commonly cited Chinese crossbow by a significant margin in terms of its mechanical sophistication. The gastrophetes, which translates roughly to belly bow, worked by bracing the rear end of the weapon against the archer's stomach and pushing the body weight forward to draw back a much stronger bowstring than any human arm could pull alone. This gave the weapon far greater draw weight, which meant the bolt it fired traveled faster, hit harder, and penetrated armor that regular bows could not defeat. A Greek engineer named Ctesibius, yes, the same man who worked on the alarm clock, later developed a fully mechanized version powered by compressed air and bronze spring mechanisms. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus recorded the gastrophetes being used in military sieges by 399 BC, during the campaigns of the Syracusan ruler Dionysius I. When Alexander the Great's armies swept east toward Persia and India, they brought advanced Greek siege engineering with them, including crossbow-derived catapult systems. The technology spread in every direction the Greek world touched, influencing military engineering from North Africa to Central Asia. 9. The First World Map, Eratosthenes of Cyrene, who lived from 276 to 194 BC and served as the chief librarian at the Library of Alexandria, did something extraordinary. He calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy, using nothing but two sticks, the sun and geometry, and then used that calculation to build the most accurate world map the ancient world had ever seen. His method was elegant. He knew that on the summer solstice the sun shone directly down a deep well in the city of Syene in southern Egypt, meaning the sun sat at exactly 90 degrees overhead at that location. At the same moment in Alexandria, roughly 800 kilometers to the north, a vertical stick cast a shadow at an angle of about 7.2 degrees. Since 7.2 degrees is 1/50th of a full 360-degree circle, Eratosthenes multiplied the distance between the two cities by 50 and arrived at an estimate of the Earth's circumference. His answer came out to approximately 40,000 kilometers. The actual circumference of the Earth is 40,075 kilometers. He was off by less than 1%, doing this calculation around 240 BC. The map Eratosthenes produced based on this calculation included Europe, Asia, and Africa, with grid lines of latitude and longitude, a system that modern cartography still uses today. He also coined the word geography, which literally means writing about the Earth in Greek. Every map you have ever read, every GPS coordinate system, every satellite imaging grid, all of it traces its foundational logic back to the work this one man did in a library in Alexandria more than 2,000 years ago. 10. The clock that ran on water. Ctesibius of Alexandria appears on this list one final time, and honestly, his presence here is completely deserved. Around 270 BC, he built the most accurate timekeeping device the ancient world had ever seen. A water clock so precise and so mechanically sophisticated that it remained the gold standard for accurate timekeeping for over 1,000 years. Earlier water clocks, called clepsydrae, existed in Egypt and Babylon, but they had a fundamental flaw. As the water level in the container dropped, the water pressure decreased, which meant the drip rate slowed down, which meant the clock ran faster at the start of the day and slower at the end. The timing drifted. Ctesibius solved this by adding a second, constantly refilling container that kept the water level, and therefore the water pressure completely constant throughout the entire day. The drip rate stayed perfectly consistent from the first hour to the last. His clock also featured a float mechanism connected to a rack and pinion gear system that drove a rotating cylinder. This cylinder had the hours of the day marked on its surface, and a pointer indicated the current time as the cylinder turned. He added a display figure, a small statue whose arm rose at a steady pace to point to the correct hour marked on a column beside it. What Ctesibius built was effectively a mechanical clock with a water-powered escapement mechanism. The concept of using a controlled, steady release of energy to drive a time display system is exactly how mechanical clocks work. European clockmakers in the 13th century reinvented this same logic using weights and pendulums. Ancient Greece was not just an old civilization. It was an engineering powerhouse that solved problems the rest of the world had not even thought of yet. These people built the future while everyone else was still figuring out the present. Subscribe right now. More content like this is coming and you do not want to miss it.